Hello and welcome to our fourth COP28 update from the Wildlife Trusts. Following yesterday's rest day, we're into the last few final days of the negotiations, and we're going to be seeing over these next few days whether the UAE COP presidency can push forward those negotiations on the global stocktake, on the global goal on adaptation, and the other remaining texts that are still outstanding. I'll come back to that in a minute, but in the background again, we've seen more reports coming out of the climate science community. One today from the Met Office saying that they're predicting that 2024 may well break the 1.5 degree global warming threshold. And while that doesn't mean we've broken the aims of the Paris Agreement yet, because it's just an individual year, this obviously isn't the sort of milestone we want to see. And alongside that, we can expect to see further coral bleaching, which we saw off the coast of the US this year, further heat waves and further wildfires into 2024 as well. We saw in the COP plenary this morning that the President was gavelling through a whole range of summarising discussions that have come from what's known as the subsidiary bodies to the meeting. These are the technical bodies that do a lot of the negotiating in the background, the subsidiary body for implementation and for science and technological advice. So those chairs were summing up, including the range of texts where they have not managed to get agreement yet, which includes the global stocktake and the global goal on adaptation. The task now is for groups to go away and see if they can push through those texts in the last few days. And the COP president was pairing up different ministers to try and chair those discussions over the next few days this morning. We also saw the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention, Simon Steele, making a really impassioned speech about the fact that if we don't bend the global curve on emissions, if we don't start to see emissions peak and fall in the next 2 years, then we can pretty much kiss the Paris Agreement goodbye, that we will breach the 1.5 degree warming threshold. And with that, he made a whole range of statements about tipping points that we might see. This is where we see abrupt and irreversible change, including the loss of ice sheets, the loss of corals, nearly all corals globally, and that 2 billion people may well be living within uninhabitable heat in the next 20 to 30 years. So that was a really stark reminder of why these negotiations are so important. And we hope that the negotiations will be concluding on Tuesday. The President, this happens at every COP, but the President was making very clear statements that he wants the negotiations to conclude by 11 a.m. on Tuesday. So we'll be watching to see whether that happens. It's a good time to pause and reflect at this stage of the negotiations what it really means to phase down, phase off fossil fuels. And while we're watching countries negotiate in these global forums to try and reach agreement to push forward, this is a negotiation that happens at a range of levels. So we're watching countries do it at the minute. We watch the UK do it by sectors within the UK's net zero target. Organisations are signing up to net zero commitments, and we have one at the Wildlife Trusts to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. And individuals can set their own net zero targets as well. One of the reasons I'm standing here and I'm not in Dubai is that this is an important contribution to meeting the Wildlife Trust net zero target, but also my own personal target. And we see at every COP, there's always a lot of disappointment and people feeling that the process isn't worth it. But at the same time, it's worth asking, are we doing what we can ourselves as individuals to try to get to net zero? If we're not taking the action we can take, can we really expect it of others? And while obviously not everything is within our control, there are always things that individuals can do to reduce their own greenhouse gas emissions and to reduce our own reliance on fossil fuels. We've got a handy guide on the Wildlife Trust website if you want to take a look. And I'll be reporting back on my own net zero journey at the end of the year to see how I've made progress in the last 12 months on reducing my own carbon footprint. As we move into the last few final days of negotiating, we're going to be seeing the Nature Theme Day tomorrow on Saturday, and as well as a whole range of different side events. These are the sort of presentation events that happen around the edges of the negotiations. We've got over 50 of those happening, so I'll be trying to tune into some of those. We're also going to be probably seeing the UK government making another announcement on nature. And we'll be watching that closely to see what it contains and whether that's domestic commitments or more global commitments. And in particularly, we've not seen much progress on deforestation at this COP, and that's something that we had hoped to see coming into COP. It was one of the asks that we wanted to see of the UK government coming into COP. So we'll see how that looks on Monday and bring you an update then. Don't forget, we've got our Wild Live event happening in London on Monday, and we'll also be streaming it on Tuesday if you'd like to watch it online. And I'll be back early next week to look at the final few days of the negotiations to see how Nature has ended up. And I'll be bringing you an update on what happened on Nature Day, which is taking place tomorrow. I'll see you then.